We do have a ton to get through in this episode.
Common sense is finally prevailing.
There was controversy this month, Dave.
I'm not particularly excited by that.
Secrets and things on set.
I haven't told them anything.
I think this is just good times all round.
Every Doctor Who is liked by somebody, and that's a really good thing.
Davo, my doctor.
I know we disagree on this one.
First world problems, Dave.
I get why fans are asking those questions.
Oh gosh, that's actually quite a lot to talk about.
It doesn't compute.
It's the elephant in the room.
That's okay.
Fandom versus the BBC.
The cardinal sin.
Moving along.
Lunch. Hello and welcome to the Doctor Who show for July of 2024. I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
And in this month where world leaders are falling, governments are toppling, Doctor Who is full of crazy rumours about its future, we are here with the Doctor Who show, your strong and stable podcast, looking back at a strong and safe Season 12. We're looking forward to having that conversation. Rob, how are you?
Dave, very, very good, coming to you all from the Sensible Centre here in Sydney.
Yes,
it's
nice, straightforward, honest takes from us. Nothing crazy, nothing wild, just two blokes having a chat about Doctor Who, and don't we need that this month?
Oh, we sure do, Dave.
So yes, our topic is a deep dive into Season 12, but a few things to say before we get there, and at the top of the show, we will start with some reviews from Apple Podcasts.
Yes, we love to read these at the start of the show, so I'm going to start with one from Romana Dvoratralunda, 61, via Apple Podcasts.
Does that mean that there were 60 Romana Dvoratralundas out there before her?
I think it could.
Wow.
Maybe it does. Yes.
Wow.
They're in Australia. This came in on the 28th of June. The heading is brilliant, 5 stars. This show is simply amazing. Rob and Dave are great hosts who clearly know lots about whatever Doctor Who related topics they are discussing. Incredibly, they can keep me interested even through over hour-long episodes. The List Makers in particular is very entertaining to listen to, as hearing the pair's differing opinions is very thought-provoking, and I love trying to guess whenever a snap will occur. As I live in Australia, I rarely come by other Doctor Who fans, so it is rather interesting to hear what more people outside of the UK think. I highly recommend this show to all Doctor Who fans. 10 out of 10.
Fantastic. Thank you to Romana Dvoratralunda, 61.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Now, because it's a big month everywhere, we have got a second review from Apple Podcasts. This one is from Archer's Angels.
Arcs Angels, maybe?
Arcs Angels? Not quite sure how you do the E in that, but Arcs Angels we'll go with. They are in Great Britain, and they said on the 11th of July, top quality Doctor Who podcast, 5 stars. I find the best media-focused review podcasts are the ones where the hosts really know their stuff, and Rob and Dave have a brilliant in-depth knowledge of the show's history, particularly the classic era, which I find lacking in other pods. Intelligent, thoughtful, entertaining, with a huge variety of topics. Fascinating listening. I'm so glad I found this podcast.
Wow, lovely comment there.
Lovely comment. So if you have a review that you would like to leave on your podcatcher, it helps other people find the podcast. So it's really, really helpful with algorithms and crazy stuff like that. And we will promise to read them at the top of the podcast. Even the bad one we read at the top of the podcast, Rob. We always do.
We did indeed, yes.
But a lot to get into. Busy month. Let's crack on to the news.
Yes.
The big news that we are starting with is we finally have the announcement of the next Blu-ray box set. It is Sylvester McCoy's Season 25. You keen for this one, Rob?
Oh, absolutely, Dave. Season 25 is just a dead set classic.
It is. It's so entertaining. I'm looking forward to it. We have got updated special effects exclusive to Blu-ray on the original broadcast versions of Remembrance of the Daleks, Silver Nemesis, and The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. They are including the rare documentary The Making of Doctor Who from 1988, which was previously on the VHS release of Silver Nemesis. All the way back then, you get to see Kev McCulloch doing his drum machine stuff behind the scenes. It's fantastic. They've got the VHS version of Silver Nemesis on there, special editions of Silver Nemesis, and a whole lot of other stuff. This looks like it's going to be an absolute banger of a release.
Yeah, Pete McTighe has been talking up the extended edition. I don't know if they're calling it an extended edition, but the longer version of the Happiness Patrol, and saying there's almost another entire episode's worth of footage that's been added.
Yeah, Andrew Carmel wasn't good at judging the length of a script before it went before the cameras, was it? No. I mean, between that and Silver Nemesis, there's probably a whole other story in that season.
Yeah. So I'm particularly looking forward to the whole thing, really. This is This is right from the wheelhouse where I was really, really, really into Doctor Who, like for the first time, just been a fan for not very long, a couple of years at that point. Having watched it all my life, but I'm talking about being a fan. And that was just what was on TV at the time. So it has an extra special place for me because of that, let alone there are some brilliant stories in it like Remembrance of the Daleks.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel exactly the same way. So that's out on the 21st of October. I suspect that the Gin and TARDIS lads will pick a story out of there, or maybe ask the listeners to pick a story from there to watch when it comes out. So looking forward to that.
I think it'd be good to do one of these extended editions that hasn't been seen before. Maybe this Happiness Patrol one, for example. I can't get that one out of my head, honestly.
Yeah, well, when the last box set came out, we did Horror of Fang Rock, partly because we love the story, but partly because we did want to see the new effects and what they'd done to it. So we'll definitely either pick just outright a story that's got something new that we can all sort of sit down and watch and compare, or if there are multiple options, yes, we might put that out to a vote. But that's a couple of Gin and TARDISes away, so we won't get ahead of ourselves, but no, I am looking forward to that.
Yeah, a whole bottle away, maybe.
You could say that. I couldn't possibly comment.
Dave, I've got our next news story because fandom's in a bit of a tiz this month. There's something new in Doctor Who. As there was an article recently in Deadline where the author recounted a Disney showcase event where Doctor Who wasn't being very well represented, and combined with the, well, let's say mixed reaction to season 1. I mean, they even got a bloke from the DWAS agreeing that it was a bit of a mixed bag for this article. It puts 2 and 2 together basically and gets 5, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
And basically it infers that the show might not go past season 2 on Disney, and if that happens, Ncuti Gatwa is on the way out. So cue much fainting from some fans, cue I told you so from other fans, and so on and so forth. Now, I actually made a video about this and threw it up on our YouTube channel just recently to remind people that Disney doesn't actually hold the power of life and death over Doctor Who. This is very important to remember. It was only back in March that RTD commented, and I quote, "If Disney collapsed tomorrow and we had to go back to making Doctor Who on a normal BBC budget, you know what? We'd all rally around and make it. And suddenly the stories would become claustrophobic ghost stories. A lot of people would actually like that." End quote. So basically, Dave, all these articles and videos saying, if Disney walks, it's the end of Doctor Who, ha ha ha, they're all pretty wide of the mark. Doctor Who will end when the BBC decides Doctor Who's going to end, not when Disney pulls its distribution money.
Yes, that is probably true. Although I can understand how people could at least get, 4.5 out of that 2 and 2, because it would mean a cut in the budget, and the BBC would have to make a choice. Do we make it cheaper, shorter, or do we throw extra capital in ourselves? So I get that it's not an existential crisis, but having made that omelette, it's hard to unmake the omelette.
Yeah, although, as some people have commented on our video and on places like X and so on, they say, well, we can't actually see the Disney money, the extra money on the screen anyway, so would it actually be that different if we went back? And one chap even started posting screen grabs from the Jodie era, and I was looking at him and thinking, yeah, some of those effects, some of the look of Jodie's era was really good.
It was, it really was.
And that wasn't on Disney money, so...
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Yeah, even if they go to 6 episodes a year, or only make a series every year and a half or 2 years, or whatever they do to make it work, maybe they don't have to do anything. And they can still make it look like the Jodie era. I think people will be really happy. But my main point being, people assume Disney's paying for the whole thing. If Disney goes, the whole thing goes. And I don't see that being the case at all. No. That is absolutely a bridge too far. Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of bridges over things like the land and the sea, we have really effectively a one-line piece of news now, which is courtesy of Digital Spy. And the line is, now, according to Deadline, the war between the land and the sea will begin shooting in September. So this much talked about, not very much hyped, spin-off from Doctor Who, the war between the land and the sea, is apparently going to happen. It will start filming in a couple of months' time.
And, I mean, this has been rumoured for a long time. Again, this is one of these things that popped up in one of the tabloids in the UK and people said, oh, that's rubbish, it's in a newspaper. Here it is coming true. Let's tick another box there, Keep up, people. I've never been too interested in this, to be honest. People are like, oh, the Sea Devils and such. And I'm like, I'm not seeing an interesting story there. I hope they've got an interesting story. I'm just not sure there is one to tell.
So when I say the not much hyped, I meant that absolutely sincerely. I haven't seen anything really about this other than sort of third-party media and reports like the one we've just quoted from. Yeah. I haven't seen a big press conference announcement. This is what we're doing. One of those Marvel style ones where they get up with the big board and go, this year we're doing season 1, and then we're doing the War Between the Land and the Sea, and then we're doing the unit special, and we're doing Cedars. I've seen nothing like that, and I've seen no teaser trailer, and obviously not even a concept trailer, because they obviously haven't filmed a single frame of... Do you have frames still? I guess you do. Whatever they film now, they haven't done a single one of them. So there's nothing out there yet. And I think at some point the BBC will say, hey, announcement, we're doing this. Here's your teaser trailer. Here's a few shots from the filming. Here's a couple of big casting announcements or something like that. And we're not even at that stage yet. We're not even at the, we've cast... Michael Keating to play the villain, whatever it might be, or we've got Daniel Radcliffe to play a Sea Devil, whatever it's going to be, we haven't even got to that stage yet. So I don't expect you to be hyped, I guess.
Yeah. Speaking of those Disney events where they put up all the logos on the screen, like we're doing this and then we're doing this. Did you like in The Boys this season when they basically did one of those events?
Yes, that was very, very funny and very, very obvious.
Yeah, it was great. To round out the news, Dave, I've got a piece here. It's a quick one, which our listeners will likely know, but it's worth talking about. And that's that Big Finish is going to be doing some Jodie Whittaker stories. They're going to put out a dozen of them, about an hour long each from July next year, featuring Jodie and Mandip Gill, of course, as Yaz. And I'm thinking, great. Not because I'm the target audience here by any stretch, but because I think there's long been talk on our podcast in other places about what Jodie would have been like away from Chibnall. And here we're going to see that, or hear it at least. Again, I'm not the target audience. I didn't even continue with the Eccleston audios after the first one or two, and I was quite passionate about him as a doctor. So this isn't on my must-listen list at all. But I'm actually really delighted this exists and that she's doing it for people who are after more Jodie, and for that just general interest sake of what's the Jodie doctor like away from Chibnall.
Yeah, a lot of people are big fans of Jodie, a lot of people are big fans of Big Finish, and there's going to be an audience for this, and it's going to make a lot of people very happy. I probably won't be a customer unless, we hear on the grapevine, hey guys, this is actually really, really good, and it's more than your normal Big Finish, in which case I may dip into it, but it's going to make people happy, people are going to be customers, great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's the news, nice and simple this month. Mm-hmm. We'll move on to our short topics, and I'm going to kick us off with the first one, which is a Just War double topic. Right. Because since we last spoke, Rob, I have reread the Virgin new adventure Just War, which was published in January of 1996. So in the back end of the range, it's probably one of the last 10 or 11 books that came out in that range. And I remember it being a good book at the time. I probably didn't appreciate quite a lot of the subtlety and the nuance when I was 16 when I read this the first time, but it's got a spectacularly good reputation and I really enjoyed it this time. It's a novel set in Guernsey, in the occupied island of Guernsey during the early parts of World War II, and it features the Doctor, Benny and Chris and Roz, so it's that big 4-person TARDIS team that we got that in that sort of later part of the Virgin books, and it just is really, really good. Benny's plot is really interesting. She starts off undercover in Guernsey, is captured by the Nazis, and the way they deal with her treatment by the Nazis is very, very powerful. It's not gruesome, it's just shocking. So that's really, really good. The idea in the novel that something's gone wrong, but it's not aliens and it's not time tricks, it's not parallel universes, it's just a very subtle thing that's happened, is really, really clever. And when we slowly tease out what is the cause of this slight change in history and why the Doctor has to fix it, that's really, really good. And it just was one of those books where I not just enjoyed the plot, but afterwards I was really into the world, and I found myself doing a bit more study about Guernsey and the Channel Islands when they were occupied and all the rest of that. And I then went on to listen to the Big Finish adaptation, which I was stunned to find out came out in August of 1999. It's a 25-year-old adaptation.
Yeah, it's got a bloody awful cover. I know that much.
It has got one of those.
So it is from the early days.
Yes, it is from those early day covers. And I've got to say, this is by far one of the best novel adaptations that I've heard from Big Finish. I said a couple of months ago that I read and then listened to Birthright, and I just thought the way that they had to pare Birthright back to sort of remove Ace and remove the Doctor and basically remove an entire plot line, plus Colin Baker's slightly bizarre performance, that wasn't a great adaptation. But this one works really, really well. They cover the Doctor's plot with Jason Kane, Bernice's ex-husband, and they sort of merge the Chris, Roz and Doctor plot all into one plot, which Jason's able to do, which makes it for a slightly smaller and more affordable and possible story. But again, the way that Bernice's plotline is done is really effective. Now, there are some problems that come into the adaptation because of the removal of the Doctor, and so that does change the premise a little bit and the twist a little bit, which works, but it's perhaps not as effective as if the Doctor was in there. And being Big Finish and for that family sort of audience, it does pull some punches, which is fair enough, and I get why they have to do it. So it's not quite the slam that the book was, but yeah, a really good Big Finish adaptation and just two different iterations of a really cool story.
Oh, that's great. I have a comment and a question. My comment is that occupation of Guernsey and all of that is a very little known aspect of World War II generally. I mean, obviously people who live in Guernsey know all about it. People in the UK would know more about it. But the further you get out there into the world, I'm thinking, even here in Australia or people in the US, it's not a very well-known aspect of World War II, and it's just so bizarre to see those images.
Yeah, actual British territory that was occupied by the Nazis.
Yeah. And my question is, many times on this podcast and just chatting in general, you make a comment about the NAs when you're rereading them, like, the first time I read this, I didn't quite get it, or the first time I read this, I didn't appreciate blah, blah, blah.
Yep, very true.
How many NAs do you think are out there that you haven't really given an adult rereading of that might surprise you?
Potentially dozens.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that I do think about from time to time. There are probably books out there that I really wrote off. So not just ones that I've gone, I kind of enjoyed that, and then I go back and go, well, actually, I still enjoyed it, but there's even more to it. Yeah. I think there are ones that I probably totally wrote off, and I do need to go back and have another look at it. And I'm slowly starting to try and mix some of those ones into my rereading over time.
Yeah, because I was listening to our friends at the Too Broad and Deep podcast, and they're looking at Cat's Cradle this past month, and Alistair in particular says how much he loved it, but he still didn't quite get it this time around. And the first time around he tried it, he didn't really get it at all. And I think that's as an adult.
Yeah. No, I heard those guys as well, and they made some really good points. And yes, Time's Crucible is one that's, way up on that list of ones that I just couldn't get into. I mean that was right at the start of the range. It would have been about 11 when that came out.
Right.
That had no chance. And it'll be interesting to go back and see them. The same with the Andrew Cartmel ones, where as a teenager I just didn't get them. I'm curious to see how I find them as an adult. And I do worry with those Cartmel ones that they were just so 90s that maybe I've missed the mark. I was too young to appreciate them when they came out, and now they're going to be so dated I'm not going to appreciate them. But no, there are definitely some new adventures out there that I do want to give another crack at, and give another chance to, because you're right, every time I read them I just get something else from them as an adult.
Yeah, very good. I'll move us along, Dave, with short topics. It's been a reasonably quiet month for me, Doctor Who-wise, outside of rewatching all of season 12, of course, for this episode. But one thing I have kept up with is my quest to keep reading through all of the new series adventures. And I've recently knocked through Wishing Well and The Pirate Loop. And Wishing Well was very cool. It's Tennant and Freema Agyeman in a, well, I should say the Doctor and Martha, in a English village with something spooky happening down a well. Simple stuff, but it feels like peak Doctor Who. I really liked it. And The Pirate Loop was quite good too. One of these stories with a time loop and a ship with an experimental drive. And basically it gets a bit Groundhog Day and people can be killed and then come back to life, which is fun. So characters start treating it almost like a joke, getting killed, because, I know I'll be back in a minute. And they have to break out of this loop. And, how are they going to do that? So, yeah, that's a good story too. And while some of the NSAs are a bit rubbish, there are others where you can totally imagine it being a 50-minute TV episode very, very easily. So almost the opposite of the NAs that we talk about so often. Many of the NSAs, it seems, were made for the small screen, Dave, and I actually quite like that.
And pitched sort of very family audience?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's no mucky references to people nuding up or having sex or, anything
being
like
tortured
that.
by Nazis.
Yes, that's it.
Fair enough. No, that sounds very cool. I'm glad you're enjoying that journey.
I am.
A second short topic from me. I have listened to some more Big Finish, not just War, but a couple of other things to celebrate, I believe, the 30th anniversary of the launch of the Virgin Missing Adventures back in the day. Big Finish have done an adaptation of the first Missing Adventure goth opera, which stars Davo as the Fifth Doctor, plus Sarah Sutton and Janet Fielding. And I've got to say, I was again very impressed by this one. I noticed when I downloaded it that it was the better part of 3 hours. And at first I sort of thought, oh, bloody hell, Big Finish, just... They love a long thing, don't they? But as I listened to it, I thought, well, no, if you're doing a proper adaptation of a 250-page book, you need 3 hours. And I think that having that extra time and taking that extra production is to the benefit, because it doesn't feel like they've missed too much out of this one. It's a pretty reasonable and robust adaptation. Now, there's certainly a few plot points that are removed, a couple of little sidelines that are removed, a couple of more gruesome aspects of it have definitely been removed, and I think that's as much for time as it is for taste and just, the family audience that Big Finish has. But it's pretty good. It's pretty out there. The fact that they're clearly not adapting Blood Harvest, which is the new adventure that it goes with, is a bit of a problem, because Blood Harvest does set up how the main character gets into goth opera from E-Space, and so without that it's a bit like, well, where did that guy come from?
Right.
And I'll be curious to know if listeners who haven't read the book or don't remember the book found all the stuff that happened in the end made sense just through the audio. I found it made sense, but I know what's happening, so that was interesting. So it had a few cuts, but it was a very enjoyable listen. I was very amused because they have one of those little making of docos at the end of it, and they always have this production team, and the director's like, "It's such an awesome one. Oh, you've got to listen to it." It's like, dude, I just listened to it for 3 hours. You're at the end of the disc, Yeah. You don't need to sell me on it now. That's always very funny. I did spend part of the listen wondering why the Fifth Doctor was suddenly obsessed with pots of tea, and it was interesting to hear Dave interviewed going, I have no idea why I'm suddenly interested in pots of tea in this. I've never done that before. And my final little criticism is one of the characters does refer to Gallifrey being in the constellation of Castorboreus.
Oh no.
And I just sat there and thought, who the hell let that through? So that was a bit embarrassing. But no, that's a really, really good adaptation. It's 3 hours, but well worth it. On the smaller end, I did finally listen to the Bernice Summerfield story, The Relics of Jigsaw, which so many people have talked about. I remember Brendan on Flight Through Entirety talked about this a long time ago. The guys at Too Hot for TV have raved about this, and when I mentioned it a little while ago, the guys at Sirens of Audio said, oh, it's one of our favourites, you've got to listen to it. And I totally get why it's got that reputation. It's an hour long. It's Bernie Summerfield meets a colony of K1 robots, and it's just fun. It's got some interesting ideas, some interesting twists. It uses the robots. I think it's Michael Kilgariff doing the voice again, which is kind of cool. Look, I don't need to give a big review of this one. It's just a fun 1 hour story with Bernie Summerfield. It's cool.
To rewind to Goth Opera, are we going to have the discussion we started on Twitter where I made the comment that Goth Opera, I mean, I love Davo, I love the Fifth Doctor era and such, but Goth Opera I find hard to get into because it's just, and I'm going off the book here because I've not heard the audio, it's just nothing like what you would experience in the Davo era. And as I said in the tweet, no, that doesn't mean I need the books to feel like they're set in a 1983 BBC studio, but Goth Opera just feels like nothing that would come from the Davo era, so I just find it hard to get into.
So it's interesting you say that, Robert, because in the future I have guested on a podcast where I have said some very similar things about another Davo missing adventure, but talked more generally about the fact that the big problem the missing adventures had was that everybody wanted them to capture the era in which they're set, but also to reflect the way that Doctor Who writing and storytelling had advanced in the new adventures in the intervening time.
Right.
And it's very, very hard to do both those things. Because if you make it more adult and more gruesome and more sweary and, you know, people are getting their kit off and all that sort of thing, people who want it to be a proper Davo story will go, well, that's not very Davison-like. But if you make it just entirely Davo, then other people will say, well, hang on, we're more advanced than this. You're doing a Target novel. We're better than that now, guys. And the ones that really work are the ones that really capture that. I think Goth Opera is one of the better ones in their range. I actually really enjoy the book. And we've had this disagreement before. I remember we discussed it when I read it on a train to Poland a couple of years ago, as a matter of fact.
As you do.
As you do. So, yeah, look, I get where you're coming from, and it's an interesting point, and when the podcast in which I've had that longer conversation is released by our friends out at that podcast, I will let you all know so you can check it out and hear my thoughts over a much longer period.
Intriguing.
But Rob, that's our short topics. We're now on to our main topic. After a bunch of hot takes on the new series, after our last monthly show where we went in depth on that whole new series of Doctor Who, we've done a lot of New Who this year, and particularly these last couple of months, and so we said, right, July, we're doing a classic season. We put out 4 nominations and asked our listeners to pick one. And on X, we had results from 145 of you. Season 18, I thought would do a bit better. Only got 11%.
Yeah.
Season 19, Davo, 17.9%. Leading for a while and got very, very close was Season 3 at 34.5%. I put that out there thinking there's no way people will vote for Season 3. It's long and it's missing and some people hate it. And I love it, but it came very close to winning, so I'll be nominating that one again. Don't you worry about that. But the winner was Season 12, 36.6% of the vote. You keen for this one, Rob?
I am, Dave. If this was a wrestling battle royale, Season 18 and 19 got tossed out of the ring pretty early on, and then it was just 3 and 12 slugging it out. And I thought 3 was going to win, honestly. I
did too until the very last moment, but a few votes came in for Season 12, and that's good. Look, we've had this sort of circling around our nominations for a while. I was very much looking forward to watching this and have enjoyed it. But Rob, let's start at the very beginning, as we always do with these deep dives. When did you first see it, and what are your memories?
Yeah, this is one of those times where I can't be definitive at all, because I would have been so young and seeing these stories on repeats and potentially never saw it in order at all the first time around. So it's not like Season 23 where I can say, oh yes, I bought Doctor Who magazine 119 and felt very famished and went home, and it was early 87 and I watched Season 23 and I can remember it clearly. Or, oh yes, I watched Season 24 at fan club parties, you know, on VHS tapes sent over from the UK. Or, oh yes, I was on the afternoon show before Remembrance of the Daleks went out. I can remember lots of stuff very clearly. But for Season 12, which dropped first time in the UK the year I was born, you know, I just don't have any clear memories around this. Were there repeats in the late 70s? Maybe I saw those as a really young kid with my brother putting me in front of the TV and trying to scare me. I have no memory of that. Repeats in the early to mid 80s? Maybe. I know I saw Revenge of the Cybermen on BBC Video at some stage because my brother bought it, and I quite enjoyed that. But broadly, Dave, this season is a total mess in my head as to when I first saw it.
Yeah, I'm a little bit similar to you. I did look up when this was broadcast in my early childhood, and it did go out as a repeat in 1983, so there's every possibility I was sitting on Dad's lap as he watched it when I was 3 years old.
Yeah, I was 8, so I may have seen that for sure.
Yeah, but I do remember it was part of the 1986 repeat run. It did come out towards the end of that year, and so I absolutely would have been watching that as it went out, and we did have a few of the episodes on VHS from that season. So Robot, for example, my dad recorded all 4 episodes and kept them, and so we had that. The Ark in Space, we had episodes 1 and 4, so clearly he wasn't working on the nights that episodes 2 and 3 were broadcast. And yes, like you, we definitely borrowed Revenge of the Cybermen from the local video library, and Dad may have borrowed a second video recorder from work and done an illegal dub.
Nice.
So going back and watching it, there are stories that I am incredibly familiar with and remember sort of word for word from my childhood. And then there are the ones that I definitely have seen many, many times, but we didn't have on home video, so I didn't see until a little bit later. And Sontaran Experiment is probably the one that I have the least memories of. I don't remember seeing that until quite a bit later.
Yeah, similar for me. Although this is a season where, as I say, I can't pinpoint the first time I saw it. I have, like just about every loyal classic fan out there, seen it so many times, and some of the stories in particular so many times. So it's not a mystery to me at all. The stories, the adventures are very familiar. They're not all comfy slippers by any means, which is how I describe something like the Five Doctors. But I've seen them enough to know there's no surprises, and I know the stories inside out. So this rewatch wasn't to learn anything new or challenge myself in any way, just as a bit of a refresh. And truth be told, I didn't even need to do that. But I really enjoyed having an excuse to get the Blu-ray out and look at the shows again. So thank you to everyone who voted for it. I quite enjoyed this.
Yeah, and inversely, because it has been something I've seen so many times and am so familiar with, I reckon this is the first time I've watched most of these stories since the Blu-ray came out in 2018. So it's probably been 5 or 6 years that since I last watched them, with the exception of Revenge of the Cybermen, which we did do about 2-3 years ago on the podcast.
I'm probably the same.
Yeah, so, and this is the thing that we talk about, isn't it, Rob? We look at our DVD shelf or our Blu-ray shelf, we go, oh, what am I going to pick to watch? You go, oh, season 12. I know that's good. I've seen that one. I know it off by heart. I don't need to pull it off the shelf. I'll go watch something that, is a challenge or I haven't seen for a while. And it gets neglected. And then you put it on and, well, that's what we're going to talk about. But any other thoughts going into the rewatch before we dive in?
I'm good.
Well, let's dive in then, Rob. And I'll throw to you. I've been talking a lot lately. Robot.
Yeah, Robot. I don't mind Robot as a debut story. It's not one I regularly want to reach for. To be honest, very few Doctor debut stories are, aside from maybe Spearhead from Space, especially from the classic era. But it does the job. It smooths over from the Pertwee era to the Baker era, both on and off screen. I think it's probably the least chaotic changeover in all of the classic era. And it doesn't crap the bed on screen. Well, maybe outside of the Action Man tank sequence. It's solid. That's my opening gambit.
I knew that I was going to enjoy this one, but enjoyed it even more than I expected to. As you say, it is a lovely easing from the Pertwee era into the Tom Baker era. And it is probably the most planned debut story of the run, because you've got Letts and Dix doing a proper changeover. They're planning it all. You've got Courtney and Levine and Liz Sladen and all the rest of it sort of making it all work. So it is very good in that sense. But watching Tom Baker just become the Fourth Doctor before our eyes so quickly, and the way that, unlike too many debut stories in both classic and New Who, frankly, he just dives in. Probably Patrick Troughton's the only other one that really just gets to just dive in as the Doctor by the end of part 1 and just go for it. Is really, really good. I've got some little points to talk about, but that's my opening gambit.
Yeah, and I'll pick up on the Doctor thread then. The Doctor comes across as very alien straight away, and not just because of post-regenerative stuff going on. To some degree, it's just Tom being Tom, but the script is also writing him quite differently to the Pertwee Doctor as well. I mean, so much for Terence saying, oh, I just wrote the Doctor. No, I think they're actually writing him different here, because he doesn't seem to give a hoot about UNIT, for example. Pertwee loved his UNIT family. although he has some affection for Sarah, it doesn't seem to be much, and he's quite happy to leave the Earth without her early in the story. By sort of using show don't tell, we see that this is absolutely a different Doctor to Pertwee.
Yeah, I think that the exchange I really enjoyed watching was the first time the Doctor meets Kettlewell. And you can imagine Pertwee sort of being quite blustery, quite pompous, but then using their view of ecology and all the rest of it to sort of bond. Whereas Tom sort of just does this, yes, well, it's very important. Yes, you've done very well, Professor, the robot. And it's just a whole different vibe. And you're right, it is written differently, it's delivered differently, and that's really, really effective. Speaking of Kettlewell, look, I get that this was written to be very, very disposable, but the Kettlewell plot doesn't work. As a kid, it totally, for me, did work. It was like, oh, he's actually a secret baddie. Oh, there you go. And, oh, he's not quite as bad as the others, That works. It works as a kid. As an adult, the whole, Kettlewell was pretending not to be involved, and it's like, well, no, there's just a little bit too... There are too many scenes where clearly the actor and or the director is treating it like Kettlewell is innocent. Yeah. And if you were doing that today, there would be a lot more little signs to the audience of, no, something's not quite right here. And then suddenly he's just helping the main villains, and then he's, doesn't quite understand their entire plan. It doesn't quite work. It is a weakness of a story, but it is a story that does have lots of cool characters like Miss Winters, like Jellicoe, like Harry Sullivan. There's always something happening. Terrance Dicks knows how to fill a script.
Yeah, I'll pick up on the Harry comment there. Harry is interesting in the way he's very old school, in almost every way you can think of. Yet he doesn't bat an eyelid at most of what goes on in this story. Indeed, throughout the whole season, like really weird stuff happens. Harry doesn't bat an eyelid, even though he's this old school bloke. And maybe you can put that down to him being with UNIT and he's been exposed to some weird stuff before this. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to have been briefed on who the Doctor is, and when he detects the two heartbeats, he's actually genuinely surprised by that. Not with other things in the story, like a robot growing to monster size, but the Doctor having two hearts throws him.
Yes, no, I kind of like that, though. There's just this sort of wonderful idea of this old-school British naval officer just seeing an alien going, oh, I say, and just getting on with it. It's kind of interesting, but I see what you're saying, but Ian Marter's performance just carries you through that, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He's great.
The last thing I want to just talk about is the K1 robot. I think that this is one of the iconic designs of the series. The way that they don't try and do a human face. It's got that cool sort of, stained glass red eye thing, and the way the mouth is framed and the body. That's an iconic image as long as it stands still. It doesn't walk very well. I think that Davo was right when he was talking about, in his era, we can't make a robot that walks now, let alone in 1980-something, and I think he was right then. But look, it was a fun story. I've scored this, Rob, I don't know if you have, but I've scored Robot a B.
I've given it 7.5.
7.5. That's good.
Yeah, it is good.
That's good.
Yeah, that is not a bad mark at all.
We then move into the Ark in Space. Every time I have watched this, when the Blu-ray came out, when the DVD came out, when I've put it on to watch it for here, I've sat down and gone, look, I'll watch at least episode 1, see how I go. And every single time I've suddenly looked at my watch and gone, part 4 just ended. Where did that time go? Because it is such an engrossing story. It was a story that as a kid I remembered being fascinated about. There were lots of ideas in there that really caught my interest and my attention, but it was one of the few stories where as a kid I didn't run away, but I did sort of have moments of, ooh, don't like that, it's a bit creepy, ooh, no. I do remember it having that effect on me as a kid, but watching it back, it's such a well-made story. The script isn't necessarily brilliant, but it works, but it just feels incredible.
And coming after Robot, this one's always felt to me like, okay, we've done what we had to do with that first one. we've got rid of that crew now. They're gone. This is the future, both of the show and quite literally that they are in the future. And even though everything's all bright and shiny, that Hinchcliffe Gothic vibe is already in there. There's fear all through this one, which is nice, because Doctor Who should be scary, at least for the kids, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. It is scary, and even though it does the, as I often say, the gleaming metal and flashing lights of the future that I love, it turns the lights down when you need to, and when you go down into the engine area with the solar stacks, that is dark and that is creepy, and it's a really good and effective use of lighting to sell the story. So I really like that. The Wirren design, Rob?
Could be, well, I was going to say could be better, but then that would take away from the actual design of it. The design is great when it's still. But when it tries to move, it falls apart.
Yeah, I don't think they've quite worked out how they walk, because they've sort of got the 6 things that are meant to be legs sort of just dangling limply at the side. It's not sort of clear if they're walking on something else. So not ideal, but the larva I actually thought was quite good. And the transitional stages, I mean, for 1975, whatever it was, some of those transitional stages, like the stuff where the skin splits apart to see another layer and everything, that's really, really good. I should just mention, friend of the podcast, Richard, notes the cliffhanger of part 1 where the Wirren falls out of the cupboard. That's his very first memory of Doctor Who.
Is that right?
So that definitely stands out there. Was it too nasty, Rob?
Well, it could have been nastier, Dave, because there's apparently a whole scene that wasn't shot where Noah's head apparently split open and lava or flies or something came out of it. But there was also the scene which was filmed and then cut, which is where Noah begs to be killed. And it's a super clumsy edit. It's Australian censored version of Caves of Androzani levels of clumsiness, this edit, where the Doctor and Vera are talking to Noah, and then next thing the door is shut in between them, and you're like, did I blink and miss something? What just happened there? And it was the whole moment of Noah begging for them to kill him was just cut out at the last minute. So it's a super clumsy edit. So yes, it did go too far and got edited, and it was going to go even further, and some scenes weren't shot.
Yeah, I think that just demonstrates how up to the knuckle they were willing to take this story. And so what's left, goes right up to what they can get away with. And look, I think it works very well. As I say, as a kid, it scared me but didn't terrify me, which I think is the right place to be. But also, you've got this TARDIS crew now just really establishing themselves. As you said, we've had the friendly, simple story and robot, enjoyable but simple, to introduce us to our new regular cast, including the new Doctor, and now you throw them into a Hinchcliffe Holmes story, and I think that works very well. It must have been a bit of a whiplash for the viewers, but a positive one, because part 2, clearly word of mouth has got around it. It's what, like the highest rated episode that isn't up against a strike or something?
Right, yeah.
Like 13 million or something watched this.
Yeah, wow.
It's absolutely impressive. Look, I could go on again and again and again about how good this is. I'm still not quite sure how the Wirren life cycle works. I've decided there must be 2. There are people who are infected and taking over, and then there are ones that just come out of eggs, because where did all the other Wirren come from? Yeah. The ending's really powerful. I don't think you'd do that ending today, which is perhaps a bit of a shame. This is possibly my favourite of the season. I gave it an A+.
Yeah. Before I give my score, I'll just say I was struck watching this just how different this is to Shooty's first season, which we've just watched. Here, Tom's like, these Wirren are bad news. Let's electrocute the bastards and save the world. While Shooty's like, oh no, this snot monster's misunderstood. Oh, it's really just like me. Let's play nice. It's like, oh, could you be any more different to the way Doctor Who is these days? Yeah, I like this a lot. It's an 8 out of 10 for me.
An 8 out of 10? I think that's harsher.
Yeah, you think it should be higher?
I think it should be... Well, I gave it an A+, so...
Yeah.
Clearly I do. But no, fair enough. We'll see if something betters it later on in the season. Take us into the Sontaran Experiment.
Yes, the Sontaran Experiment. It's a story I've always liked, primarily because of its length. We get in, we run around the countryside, and then we get out. I don't think the storyline could really sustain more episodes because there's not a lot going on. You've got the lone Sontaran doing his experiments. He needs to be stopped. Why he's doing the experiments when the Earth is deserted and the Sontarans could just arrive en masse, I really have no idea. It doesn't make sense to me in that sense. But as far as 2 episodes go, as a bit of a runaround, falling down some holes, a few fights, some tension. It's fine. It's an easy watch. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too, and it's definitely an easy watch. And I want to pick up on something you said there about how light it is, because watching this again, I realised there's only about 15 minutes of actual plot in this story. Yeah. Episode 1, the entire episode 1 is just set up. It's really good setup. I think that the filming's really good, and we'll come back to that. But the location's really good, and it's very tense and interesting, but you don't actually meet Steyer until the end of episode 1 of a two-parter. Yeah. And then the last sort of 5 to 10 minutes of the second episode is just the denouement and the fight. And then everybody's saying, oh, goodbye, it's been a jolly jape. So there's only actually about 15 minutes of the Sontaran experimenting on people and doing that plot in there. And the fact that I've never really noticed that before just says how much the story carries you through the atmosphere and through the mystery and the direction. And I was watching this time, and the directors clearly just looked at those locations and those rocks and gone, right, time to go and have some fun. Because he's looking down, he's looking up, he's walking through stuff. He makes incredible use of the location. It's some of the best direction we've seen, and I don't think it gets noticed because it is this tiny little two-parter in this season.
Yeah, it does get lost a lot in this season because there's just, well, as we're going to be discussing in a minute, there's some much bigger stories in this season.
There are, but look, it looks amazing. Steyer's great. I think it's also really interesting that we sometimes talk about TARDIS crews larger than two not always working. Here we have a small, simple two-part story, but each of the three regulars gets a strand. They get something to do, and they play a part. And I think that's just a really good piece of writing. There's a lot to recommend this. A really great lot to recommend this.
Yeah. Interestingly, Dave, this will be news to you. I've never told you this story before. When we made a fan film in our local club back in the late 80s, I essentially ripped this off because I wrote this fan film and I had the Doctor, played by myself, land on a planet with his companions and they find the victim of some experiments. And it goes on from there with a lot of running back and forth through fields. One of our listeners who you know, Mark Douglas,
who
I mentioned from time to time, he was an evil Time Lord in it, Dave. He was conducting the experiments. But weirdly, I don't have any memory of sort of knowing I was ripping it off at the time. I don't recall being a sort of a student of the Sontaran Experiment and even knowing it well enough in the late 80s to rip it off. Although looking back, I see all the same beats now, so I must have been ripping it off. Isn't that weird? I must have channeled it somehow for this fan film.
That's really weird. It's funny how that stuff happens, isn't it?
Yeah, very strange. I do want to do a modern edit digitally of that fan film. I don't know if I'm brave enough to put it on YouTube, but if I ever do, I'll share it with you, and you can have a laugh at myself and Mark and some other fans.
I would love to see that. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. I would give this a 7 out of 10 myself.
7 out of 10. So it's the weakest of the three so far from you.
For me, yes.
I'm giving it a B+, so I'm putting it in the middle of the three so far.
Interesting. Okay.
Rob, that brings us to a genesis of the Daleks.
Yeah.
Now, this is one that I remember as much from having some of it as off-screen recordings as from having a cassette of the abridged version. Mm-hmm. So I have some good memories of this, but it's not one that I've pulled out all that often. I haven't watched it for 6 years, in fact. And when I put this on, I was very, very impressed. I was very, very impressed. It looks and feels like a big story. Even just little things. So, for example, when the Doctor and Harry are taken on the little electric go-kart in part 1, it feels like they're actually going through a long corridor, and it feels like there are lots of different sets. Now, I know that it's just the same set of desks and flats reorientated in different ways, but it feels big. And for 6 episodes, it doesn't let up.
No.
I was very, very astounded when we got to the prisoners trying to escape up the rocket, and I thought, wow, we're only up to the end of part 2.
Yeah.
And we've already done all of this, and there's more to come. It packs it in.
Yeah, it does. I think this is a six-parter that holds together. And I don't say that lightly, as I will regularly and happily call out six-parters from the classic era for their padding. You're often left defending them, Dave.
Both of those are true, yes.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to say this stuff. But this one always feels like there's more to say, or it's got something more up its sleeve. And you're not sitting there thinking, oh yeah, this is 100% padding, like you do with some stories. Now, it could be that you could take a scalpel to this and cut some material away, meaning there really is padding there, but it's done well enough, it's disguised well enough, that you're not ever really thinking about it.
No, absolutely. And this neatly brings me on to the next point I want to make, which is my, as I'm sure you anticipated, Rob, my taking a moment to praise the wonderful Terry Nation.
Yes.
Now, look, I'll get on my soapbox and say there are fans out there that watch this, think it's really good, and say, oh, well, it's so good Terry Nation couldn't have written that. It must have been a Bob Holmes page one rewrite. And in the next breath, they'll talk about all the Terry tropes that are included in there. And this is so clearly a Terry Nation script. The themes, the characters, the writing, the tone is very, very Terry Nation. And clearly he was just inspired by the suggestion of Letts and Dix to go and write the genesis of the Daleks. And once he started writing that and he started to come up with Davros and Nida and all the rest of it, he clearly just was inspired and wrote some of his best work. But it is very Terry Nation. The plot ideas, the characters are all Terry Nation. And what is also Terry Nation is that understanding of serial television, which is that every episode has to have some action beats and some moments to keep you going and to keep the action going. And you see that in the episodes, and you see that in the cliffhangers. There's cliffhanger after cliffhanger is a moment of action or excitement or tension that's really, really good. You go to part one and you get that, perfect. The weaponry is perfect. Just really, really subtle, but you see the Daleks. Then you've got the freeze frame of Sarah falling down the gantry. You've got the Doctor being electrocuted. The cliffhanger to part 4 is one that has definitely been down the pub very, very drunk by a few of us over time. What, you will tell me? We can act that out pretty well in our little gang of fans. There's just... Terry Nation knows how to keep you interested, and my God, does he do it here.
Yeah, he even throws in a countdown. There are bombs. There's radiation. It's all of those things, but it's the creation of the characters that is most effective here. Yeah, and look, similar to what I said with Ark in Space, it's extraordinary when you watch this, like we just have, within a month or so of shooting Gatwa Doctor Who going out, because it's just so grim and bleak, and people get gunned down all the way through. Bodies pile up, literally. There's ambiguity as to why people do what they do. The Khaleds all aren't bad guys, per se. There are questions of morality. This is something you can watch as a child, because there's no blood and guts, there's no swearing, none of that. And you can just be engrossed by it, and you can be scared by it. But you can also watch this as an adult and take plenty away from it and think about it. This is an example of how Doctor Who works best. And I can sense people rolling their eyes, like, oh, good work, Rob. It's only one of the best 70s stories, if not one of the best classic stories. Very safe of you to be saying all of that. Yeah, I get that. But just having seen it after the recent season on TV, it's just so clear how different Doctor Who can be over the decades.
Yeah, and that grim nature of it is something that really did come home to me. I think, like a lot of men, as I get older, I get a bit more sentimental because, you've seen more of the world and you create those connections and you've lost things over your life. And so, as a kid, you see the Khaled city being destroyed. You're like, okay, that's a cool explosion. As an adult, you do pause and go, that's an entire city of people just destroyed.
Yeah.
And then you get to the Thals and you have that understanding of these people think, wow, we've just won a 1,000-year war. It's time to be victorious. And then Daleks go through and wipe them out. And although we don't see women and children on the screen, presumably there were men, women and children, just civilians sitting at home being wiped out by this rocket or by the Daleks. By the end of it, the good guys get gunned down.
Yeah.
Never mind, we see Ronson, who does a good deed for the Doctor, and he gets killed for his troubles. But then we see Garman and all of his band of goodies just brutally shot down. As you say, bodies literally piling up. Then Nida gets killed, then Davros gets killed. I want to come back to that later, but you do appreciate just how grim it is and just how much genocide there is in the real sense of the word.
And speaking of Nida, I don't know if this is folklore or not, but you've got Nida with a bloody iron cross on in some of these scenes. And some people say Peter Miles actually brought that along himself and would put it on before takes and eventually got busted, which is why it disappears. It's on and off on his uniform in different takes. I think all he needed was some little Himmler glasses, Dave, and he would have gone full Nazi in this.
So I'm going to question this, Rob, because I've heard these stories as well. Now, I looked at it. Now, I'm not an expert on Nazi memorabilia, but I've seen enough, World War II era movies and television shows. Although it looks like a sort of a Maltese cross, iron cross, I didn't think it looked like an actual iron cross. It looked to me like they've said to the costume department, give us something that looks a bit like an iron cross, but not too close. And they've done something that's very close, but I don't think it quite is. And they've probably gone actually on reflection, maybe it's too close, take it off. I don't know. Right. I mean, you're very into medals and memorabilia, Rob. Not necessarily Nazi stuff, but you're into that sort of stuff. But did you sort of feel it looked accurate?
Well, the shape is on point.
Yeah, yes, it's definitely a Maltese cross of some sort, yes.
It seems to be sort of blackened out, I think an iron cross might be a bit more metallic looking.
That's my memory, yes.
But, the way it does sort of disappear from the uniform, that's why I've sort of bought into the folklore, because he does have it, and then suddenly he doesn't have it. Was the continuity person asleep, or did they really go, oh no, we can't be having this? Although they are letting them do sort of Hitler salutes at each other, so I don't know. No,
I mean, it is interesting, and they absolutely have waded into the World War II iconography in no subtle way, and that's appropriate. I think that this is 30 years after the end of World War II, and like when I think about what happened 30 years ago, that's not that long ago.
Well, there'd be people watching this who fought in World War II who are my age now.
Yes.
And I think I don't feel that old.
Yes.
But there would have been people my age watching this who had fought in World War II. That's how close it was.
Yes, and then people, a little bit younger who had grown up in World War II. So, yeah, like it was just, I think, at that point when you really could start doing allusions to World War II in this way. I think it was really just the first sort of era of that. So that works really, really well.
And just on Nazis, we've got to mention, of course, that Guy Siner goes on to play Lieutenant Gruber in A Lower Low. So it's just very funny to see him in this.
Yes, look, I don't have a lot of time for Hello, but you are absolutely correct. And I was going to mention the cast, including Guy Siner, Peter Miles, Michael Wisher, Stephen Yardley. Like, this is a very well-cast piece of television. David Maloney absolutely knew what he was doing. Now, I praised Terry Nation before, but as much as it's got the good Terry Nation tropes, it does have some of the weaker ones as well. And that is that sometimes his conception of a world doesn't always work with reality, and many people have commented on the two domes within spitting distance having a long war. I like to imagine that they're just the closer cities of two larger countries, and maybe there's a whole bunch of Karls and Thals several hundred kilometres back. Where are the farms? Where's the industry? And obviously we know enough Thals survive that they're able to perpetuate and populate the species, and given we only see one female Thal survive, we assume there are others out there somewhere if they repopulated the species. Otherwise Bataan was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that repopulation. And also Nation does have this thing of doing very large scope, 4 universes and all the rest of it, and I think the 1,000 Years of War doesn't quite work. It just is a bit too much to really sort of either be comprehended or to really work. If he'd said 90 years of war, you go, okay, that's 3 or 4 generations. Yeah, I get that. I can see that devolution in technology and culture, all the rest of it. And I think that maybe if he just fixed a few of those things, this would be even better.
Yeah, that was hard for me as a kid, because there's even the scene where they hold up like a laser rifle in one hand and like a single shot rifle in the other. And for mine, if your culture has got to laser rifles, how long ago did you leave the single shot, like Lee Enfield sort of rifles? I just don't know why they would have something. Did they get them out of a museum? Where did they get all the ammunition from? I get the vibe they're going for, but it didn't. I couldn't see that as making sense. That you would suddenly get 1,000-year-old rifles from somewhere en masse and equip an army with them.
Yeah, look, it sort of worked conceptually for me, particularly as a kid, and particularly the scene where they say, oh, well, we won't shoot these people, we'll hang them, and you go, oh, they're devolving again. We're seeing a step go down from gunshots to hanging, you know. So it works, but yeah, conceptually it doesn't quite necessarily hold together.
Because even now, I mean, Baker rifles and Brown Bess muskets from the Napoleonic Wars, that's only a couple hundred years ago. There's not many of those around.
Yeah, well, is it that they found them all, or was it that these are cheaper and easier to manufacture?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe if they're manufacturing them.
Yeah, that's how I took it. We probably don't need to assess it any further than that. Rob, we've spoken several minutes now about Genesis of the Daleks and haven't properly mentioned Davros.
I'll start with the negative, which is when I was a kid, I didn't really understand why he looked so alien to everyone else. Even if he'd had an accident, why is his skin so stylized? The mask is slightly too stylized for me. I think I like the more melty skin sort of mid-80s Davros look better.
Okay.
As being a bit more realistic. Whereas here, parts of him look very realistic, but other parts just look too squared off. He doesn't look like a real person.
Okay, I can understand that. I've never had a problem with it, but I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, that's just me starting on a negative, because otherwise I think Davros is a fantastic Doctor Who villain, and this is a wonderful debut story for him.
Yeah, it's a really good performance. We're not breaking particularly new ground here saying that Davros, as played by Michael Wisher, is a fantastic performance. The thing that really struck me, though, was how much this character works as a one-off and how effective that arc is to see him go from desperate to perpetuate his race to perpetuating himself to betraying the Khalid so the Daleks can be created, and then the moment of realisation that no, they are uncontrollable and utterly evil, and the decision he makes to destroy them because he reaches for the destruct button, and then he's killed with that blood-curdling scream. And I just thought, that's it. Yeah. That's the perfect character arc. And whilst there are many Davros stories that I've loved, and there's some great Davros performances that I'm very glad we have, part of me does watch that and thinks, if only they'd kept him to one story, wouldn't that just be an amazing arc and an amazing finish?
Yeah, and you could potentially tell some prequel stories, maybe even pre-accident prequel stories where he's not in the chair.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Dave, I would give this a 9 out of 10.
I would give this an A.
Yeah.
So I think we are on par for that one. Look, it is... I think the arc in space is just a little bit better for me. You've said this is the best, I think, unless Revenge is about to surprise us. But depending on my mood, I could like both of them equally. It's hard to split them. This is just such a good season. When you've got the arc in space versus Genesis of the Daleks for best in the season, I mean, how spoiled are we?
Yeah, this is the bigger achievement for me by being a really good six-parter.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I think that if you were trying to grade them objectively, you would probably say that Genesis is the better piece of work. I just get sucked into the arc in space that tiny little bit more. But look, I mean, whether this is an A or an A+, like, who cares? It's a classic.
Exactly.
Revenge of the Cybermen, Rob.
Yes, by Jerry Davis, with a lot of input, shall we say, from Robert Holmes.
Yes.
Dave, this is one of those stories that's always had a bit of an odour about it in fandom to me. Never quite panned like a Time and the Rani by any means, but never spoken of in glowing terms by everyone either. I've never had an issue with it myself. Maybe it's because I watched it when I was still young in the mid-80s on that VHS that my brother bought. So it was always just a thrilling space adventure with Cybermen and Tom Baker being awesome. So it's always been that in my mind. I don't know. I've always been fine with this. I like the way it reuses the Ark in space set, and the idea of repurposing the beacon, I think, in the future is really cool. Although the idea that the station would last thousands of years in order to do that seems quite far-fetched when you stop and think about it. I mean, I did some research here, Dave. The ISS went up 25 years ago, and it's already stuffed. So, although future technology might be a bit better, I still don't think a structure in space would really last thousands of years. But that's my only complaint there.
No, like you, I love the idea of revisiting the set and reusing the set. And as a kid particularly, it just made so much sense. It was such a wonderful idea, particularly because the set is so good and you've got those long corridors with space behind them. And it just looks fantastic. Rob, I went into this story with a lot of people having said on Twitter, and we raised it, oh, this is the weakest of the story. And I watched this story, and whatever else you say about its faults, it's got some faults. I was never for a single moment bored watching this.
No.
It's a good plot with cool aliens, good monsters, a space setting, a number of ideas, cybermats, plagues, transmats, rockets, spaceships. It's everything that a young Doctor Who fan would want, and a, young at heart, older Doctor Who fan could want. It's just a great space adventure. Is it particularly sophisticated? Look, no, it's not. It's a pretty simple sort of story. But even then, Kelman himself is pretty interesting because the guy's an arsehole.
Yeah.
Like, the guy's a wicked, wicked character, but at first when you think he's a cyber agent, you're going, oh, well, he's the baddie. Then you go, well, he's not the cyber agent. He wants to wipe the Cybermen out. He's merciless about how he does it, and he does it for very, very avaricious reasons. So he's not, the most complicated and morally dubious character. Like, he's still an arsehole.
Yes.
But there's a bit more going on there than perhaps we give them credit for.
Yeah, I mean, he's prepared to gun down the Doctor and the remaining crew members to get his way early on in the piece, rather than bringing them in on the scheme,
Yeah, and he kills 47 crewmen before the story starts.
Well, that too. Yeah, so I agree on that. Tom, I think, is quite tough in this story, Dave. The way he gets stuck into the Cybermen verbally is really quite something. It makes me wonder how Pertwee would have done it. I don't think he would have been so up in their face, maybe sarcastic to them, but not so loudly mocking. And I don't think Pat would have been like this before him. Maybe Bill, if he'd had, some more Cyberman stories up his sleeve, might have been calling them tin soldiers and having a bit of a rant at them. It's interesting to think about, but I really like Tom in this story.
Yeah, Tommy's fantastic. Liz is fantastic. Ian is fantastic. It's a good story. Again, there's a really strong cast. Lots of people who are in other Doctor Who episodes or Blake 7 episodes, which is really, really good. But I think the thing that really makes it work is the location footage. I think if we'd gone from that wonderful space station set to a quarry, that would have been significantly detrimental. But going from a cool space station set to a proper cave, I think just means there is a consistency of visual standard through this that helps to hold the whole thing together. And when it looks good both on location and on the space station, and there's always something happening in the story, that it holds together really well.
Yeah, those Wookiee Hole scenes are really good, quite atmospheric, and I think they do a good job trying to match the location stuff with the studio. Of course, when it's a studio, but compared to some efforts in classic Doctor Who over the years, I think the cave sets look really good. They don't really crap the bed. They look passable, which for the 70s, with some of the stuff that wasn't passable, is actually a really, really big effort. And heck, that Vogan logo is so good, the Time Lords nick it later on, Dave.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are a couple of moments when the two Vogon factions are forced to have a gunfight at about 30 centimeters apart, which is it's right. It's 1970s Doctor Who. Like, okay, that's fine. But given that the rest of the story feels so big, and the beacon, whether it's there as the Ark or Nova Beacon, it never feels small. It always feels like they've got to go somewhere to go to other, like they've got to go down corridors and they've got to go. It takes them time to get around this station. It's really well filmed. Once again, Rob, we've gone a long chat about this story without mentioning the titular monster. Comments on the Cybermen from you?
It's great to see Cybermen back because I love Cybermen. Whenever I watch this, I always end up thinking, not about the Cybermen in this story, but I always end up thinking about what it would have been like if we'd had them in the Pertwee era. I assume they would have looked pretty much like this, maybe acted like this, I don't know. But talking about them in this story, I love seeing them back. I just have that soft spot for them that I find them hard to criticise. I know people get stuck in over this. I know, like you were saying earlier, people saying, oh, this is the worst of the season. I mean, surely Sontaran Experiment is the most basic of the season, with its 15 minutes of story in 50 minutes. I like the Cybermen. I like this story. I don't have much more to say than that.
I like the Cybermen. I like the adventure that we get from the Cybermen. Watching it this time, look, I'm not going to, completely pan the way the Cybermen are written, but I do see the criticism that they're just a little bit too emotional and sort of, have witty and ironic lines and stuff. I did sort of watch it this time and go, oh, that's probably a little bit too out there even for me to defend. So that is a fault. I see that, but do I care that much because I'm enjoying the story? Well, no. That's a fan being picky.
The bit I really like? This idea that they've been smashed in this war and they are these sad little tin soldiers on their little spaceship tootling around the universe still wanting to take over. I like that vibe. There's something sad about it.
Yeah, and I've often thought, even if some of the shots of them striding around the beacon with their hands on their hips don't quite work, we still get two Cybermen going down to Voga and just taking on the entire Vogan Defence Force and winning.
Yes.
They're not written or shown deliberately to be poor or pathetic. Is the costume the best cyber costume we've had? No. Are the performances the best cyber performances? No. But even at that weaker sort of depiction, they still are an implacable, ruthless, unstoppable force. And in the end, one of the good guys has to sacrifice his life to stop those two Cybermen. So they're still very effective as a force.
Oh, yeah. I love when the Vogans are like... the Cybermen have landed and they're not stopping for anything. They're just smashing through us. And it's like, oh, yeah. Because you see that on screen, but when you hear it said verbally, you can just hear the fear and the worry they've got over just two Cybermen being on the planet. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's a really good story. I'm giving it a B, which is the same as I gave Robot. I'm struggling to split the weakest of the season and they're both getting Bs, and I'm struggling to split the best of the season, they're both getting AA pluses. Like, Jesus, that's good.
Yeah.
What about you for Revenge, Rob?
Yeah, I'm giving it 8 out of 10, which is the same as Ark in Space.
Very nice. So very high scores across the board from both of us.
Yeah, it's up there for me. So, look,
I don't have anything more really to say that I haven't already said, other than I enjoy all 5 of these stories. They were very easy to watch. The Hinchcliffe era, the Tom Baker era, is forming as we watch it, and it's just enjoyable. More than anything else, forget the analysis, forget the picking apart, forget whatever. I just sat down and I was never bored by these 5 stories. I just enjoyed them.
Yeah, hear. And when you think about how beloved this season is versus how the new season of Doctor Who was panned, and I know this is the 3rd time I've brought up the new season of Doctor Who, but we have just watched it in the last month, so it's top of mind. You start to wonder if this modern idea of what the audience wants from Doctor Who today is really what the audience wants. I think if the new season was more like this, if it was a modern version of this, it would be adored by a much wider group of fans, because people like drama, they like tension, they like bad guys who are genuinely evil and do evil things, they like horrible mutations, they like stuff that makes them think. And that's where TV is at today. This is why people watch things like House of the Dragon or The Walking Dead or Sons of Anarchy or whatever. And I know some listeners might be spitting out their tea and say, you can't turn Doctor Who into those shows, but that's not what I'm saying. It's a tone thing. It's this gothic vibe of the Hinchcliffe era that everyone talks about and loves, and which is really well suited to the show. It appeals to adults, appeals to kids who want to be scared and have a reaction to what's on screen. If you're 10 years old today, are you more affected by watching a CGI Sutek dragged through the universe on his dog leash, or by the Doctor being attacked by Khaled mutants in a darkened laboratory? To me, it's just obvious which is the more scary and the more interesting and the more engrossing.
Yeah, look, I know exactly what you're saying, and as we've said before, times change. I mean, we grew up as kids on stuff like Battle of the Planets and Astro Boy going around wiping people out and, people getting killed and shooting machine guns out of his ass. So, we grew up in a different time, and I think that we were lucky to have that as kids' TV. I think we were lucky to grow up with repeats of the Hinchcliffe era, but, Bluey's popular too, I guess.
Yeah. I'll just finish by saying it's a great season of 70s Doctor Who. There are Tom seasons I like more when you weigh up all the stories involved, but this one's very watchable. Great stories, and it gets the Fourth Doctor off to a flyer.
Yeah, this is an era that in some ways is only going to get better with several better seasons. It just shows how good the show... I mean, the show wasn't just its golden era in that mid-70s time, wasn't it?
That's it, yeah.
Well, that's our look into Season 12 of Doctor Who. We have some listener emails, and I'll kick us off with our old friend Neil C. from Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
Nice.
Evening, fellas. I have to say I was really pleased that you'll be reviewing Season 12. For me, a bona fide classic. Tom Baker absolutely nails it from the get-go. All the stories are good and honest. It's just fun. And for me, that's what Doctor Who should be all about. Robot is a solid opener, granted its very Pertwee era. Arc in Space is where Baker comes into his own. The Sontaran Experiment is pretty straightforward, but a nice go between the previous and the next story. Genesis of the Daleks is superb, and Revenge of the Cybermen, well, I've mentioned it before, it's my favourite Fourth Doctor story.
Wow.
I'm not saying it's the best, but it's nostalgic and reminds me of picking up my first ever VHS in Virgin Megastore Belfast as a young child. A colourful series from start to finish, and it's just simple. No ridiculous arc or thread like nowadays. I love how there's no TARDIS for a few stories. It's basically let's get from A to B with adventures in between. Well, I suppose it's more A to D. Sarah and Harry are wonderful together. Davros debuts. What's not to like? Pure fun from start to finish. I love it. Thanks, guys. Neil C. Well,
that's
what
lovely.
more can we say? Yeah, fantastic.
Really good. I'm going to read an email from Linda Macken. She says, "Hi, Rob and Dave. Just to let you know, I listen to every episode out here on lovely lava-strewn Lanzarote, and I love it. I love your enthusiasm and your knowledge of the show, and also, you're just so funny. I know it's hard work, and I want you to know I appreciate the effort. It's a big commitment, a big chunk of time taken out of your lives to give back to fans, so I want to thank you both for that and say please keep it going as long as you feel able. Thanks again, guys. Have to say, it felt really weird hearing the Doctor mention Lanzarote on Tales from the TARDIS, for many reasons, not least because I reckon I'm probably the only person on Lanzarote who watched it. I've lived here for 20 years, and I've never connected with anyone who watches Doctor Who, although I'm sure some of the visitors to the island must watch it at home. Anyway, thanks again, guys, and I hope other people write in to say where they listen to the podcast. It's great to think of fans being brought together from far-flung places to share their love of the show. Bye for now."
That's so incredibly lovely, but so incredibly cool that you're watching it from Lanzarote, the location, my favourite Davo story. So that is fantastic. I would love to get to Lanzarote one day.
Yeah, and maybe one of your least favourite Capaldis?
Which one was that?
Kill the Moon.
Yeah. I don't hate it, but it's not one of the better ones.
Yes.
We have a message here via DM on X from Owen Prince. "Hi, Rob and Dave. Just thought of another hole in the Sutek being attached to the TARDIS for apparently decades and decades now. When the TARDIS was split into two in The Giggle, did he not get split into two and therefore is attached to two TARDISes, or is it TARDI? And even more so, when the TARDIS became human for a cup of tea during the Smith era, why didn't he just kick House out and take it for himself? So bloody ridiculous. The more I think about it, the madder I get. Anyway, I had to share my brain dribble with you. Thank you for that, Owen. Always a pleasure to hear from you.
And your brain dribble.
Yes. And look, we've said before that that is a plot that can be very easily torn apart, and we get it.
Yes. Steve Clamp, also via a DM on X, says, "Hi, Rob and Dave. I had to watch the new season on a delay due to being so tied up with covering our general election here in the UK. I've seen it all now, and I've listened to your hot takes and season overview. Your content was great as always. As for Season 1, for me it is the lowest point of Doctor Who since I became a fan in 87. There was a lot of Jodie Whittaker's run I didn't like, but each season had a few great moments. But for me, none of this was special. 73 Yards felt great, but the resolution was unforgivable. I thought the show looked okay, but no more impressive than some of the Matt Smith or Capaldi eras. I really hope lots of young people have loved it, and that maybe I'm just the wrong audience now. But I fear young people, in the most part, expect their sci-fi to be tense, with believable characters and clever plots that make sense. On the plus side, the Tales of the TARDIS Pyramids of Mars was superb, including the bits with Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson. Turns out they can be great together. I hope you get to see it. Keep up the good work, both of you.
No, thanks for those thoughts, Steve. It's always interesting to hear what our listeners think. It's a shame you didn't enjoy the season. Hopefully you'll enjoy the next one more.
I still haven't seen that Pyramids of Mars.
No, I must admit I haven't sorted it out, and it certainly hasn't been shown in Australia, so no, I've missed it so far too. I have one here from Dylan Mooney, who comes in via our YouTube channel, and this is regarding the classic Doctor Who season openers suggestion being covered on the List Makers.
Yes.
Hello, I am indeed listening from Dublin. Such a surreal experience to have my idea discussed. Highlight of my weekend, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Ah.
As yous both said, plenty of snaps. I took Rob's view of the best 5 stories that happened to be season openers. Saw none live due to age, so never had the impact as openers for me, sadly. My top 5 classic openers are 1. Horror of Fangrok, 2. Remembrance of the Daleks, 3. Terror of the Autons, 4. The Time Warrior, and 5. Tomb of the Cybermen. There's definitely some snaps with us there, Rob.
Yeah.
As you said, you could maybe put Zygons in there, but it really feels like the climax of Series 12. Let's definitely opened well and with a bang. Honourable mentions for me would be Spearhead, Planet of Giants, Attack of the Cybermen, and An Unearthly Child. It just occurred to me that there's only one missing opener in The Smugglers, which is a shame as I enjoy the recon. Discovered you guys through the excellent review of Shadow of Weng Chiang, one of my favourites. Many thanks for a great listen, Dylan Mooney.
Oh, that's great. I love it when people get their topics read out.
Yeah, that's awesome. One last one from you, Rob.
Yes, this is from Doris Day via YouTube, also about the top classic Doctor Who season openers episode of the Listmakers. And Doris says, I'd agree with all of those, apart from Remembrance, which I'm not keen on. My list would be Terror of the Zygons, Spearhead from Space, Terror of the Autons, Horror of Fangrok, and The Dominators. The power of nostalgia elevates that last one of the first Who stories I ever watched on transmission. And sure, I can see the problems with it now, but as a little kid it was so exciting and I love the Quarks. When I look at the bigger picture of my personal fandom, the Dominators had much more of an influence for me than, say, The Day of the Daleks, which would easily be number 6 on my list. I even used to draw my own terrible comic strip stories with me as the hero, and nearly every serial would involve a battle with the Quarks. They were so easy to draw, for one thing.
That's really fun to hear. That's just cool. I like that. Thank you, Doris Day.
Yes. I love that we've got people who are out there watching Troughton's going out the first time, and we've also got people who, discovered Doctor Who 2 or 3 years ago in our audience.
Yeah, that is kind of wonderful, isn't it?
It's nice. Yeah.
Thank you to everybody who wrote in. A quick what have we been watching? I'll kick us off because I've got a quick one and then a longer one I do want to discuss, and Rob, I suspect you've got thoughts as well. I did rewatch the late 90s UK miniseries Moseley, and that I just thought was a really, really excellent little 4-part series. It's about 4 hours altogether, and the way you go from Moseley coming back from World War I, joining the Conservatives, going into Parliament, then defecting to the Socialists, and then falling out with them, and then falling into his own party, and then bringing a little bit of fascism into it because that's trendy in the 30s, and then seeing the descent into proper anti-Semitism, and then just, him just selling his soul. Like, just the evolution of that character over 4 episodes was really, really interesting to see. And Doctor Who's Gemma Redgrave does turn up as his wife. So that was interesting as well. I enjoyed that. But look, we did mention last time, Rob, we were both watching season 4 of The Boys, which we have now both seen all of, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. And look, It's interesting. I'll open with a comment you made when we were having a bit of a chat about this a couple of weeks ago, Rob, where you said, look, even The Boys, not quite as its best, is still better than most things on television. And that is absolutely true. Like, if it's to your taste, and I get it if it's not, it's a very particular taste, but
yes.
But if it's to your taste, it's very, very well done. The lead performances, I mean, Anthony Starr is just incredible as Homelander. So it's really, really good. But I was reflecting on this because it does tie with something we've discussed a lot about modern Doctor Who and messaging and all the rest of that. And I thought when you watch the first couple of seasons of The Boys, it's violent and it's graphic and it's out on the edge and it's got some really cool ideas and some really interesting characters. And that premise of what if there are superheroes but they're a bunch of arseholes is a really cool premise. And it's something that I'm surprised there hasn't been more of. I mean, you know, the movie Brightburn's probably another example, but a very different way of doing that, and that was a cool movie. But, you know, you can watch those first couple of seasons as just a bunch of dark superheroes doing, you know, lots of cool and bloody things to each other. But if you watch it, you can also see a little bit of, oh, I get it. They're using superpowers as an analogy for power in other sorts, whether it's, you know, the power of the employer or power of, you know, privilege or status or whatever, and how people use their power in an abusive way, you know, whether it's workplace harassment, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's just, you know, other sorts of negative behaviours, you know, how people use real-world power. Superpowers are being used as an analogy there.
Yeah.
You can see that in there, but if you don't see it, you can still watch a really good adventure. Season 3, I sort of thought saw a little bit more direct allegory coming in. I thought, okay, that's sort of interesting. And then I watched Season 4 and I thought, gee, they're not being subtle here.
No.
This is proper ripped from the headlines sort of stuff. And I sort of thought, I do remember a couple of interviews with the showrunner after Season 3 where he said he was very annoyed that members of the audience hadn't got what he was trying to say or even thought that Homelander was kind of cool and they liked him. And I thought maybe he's taken that to heart and thought, right, I'm going to make it very, very clear what I stand for and what I want to do. And I found an interview where he said absolutely that was the case. He's like, you think Homelander's the good guy? Wait till you see Season 4. I'm going to make my point. And I just thought, is the season better for being less subtle and being ripped from the headlines? Even if I agree with the majority of the points that the showrunner's making, and I still enjoyed it, I thought I maybe liked it when it was a little bit subtler, and if going over the heads of a few of the audience who are just like, hey, cool, he put a bomb up the superhero's ass and blew him up. Oh, wow. Like, if some people just take it at that level, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And if some people take away a message, that's fantastic. But I think forcing the messages they have in this season, even if I agree with the message, I thought was a little bit deleterious.
Yeah, Anthony Starr, some of the interviews I've seen him do from this past round of junkets relating to this season, I've even seen him throw comments in that, you know, Homelander isn't the good guy, folks, you know, basically along those lines. It's almost like they're shocked at who some of their fans are. But they shouldn't be, because fandoms are very broad and diverse. And I think it's sometimes like the Doctor Who fandom thinks it's only a particular kind of person when it's actually a lot more diverse. And I think the Boys viewers are like that too. And maybe the showrunner, maybe some of the actors have realised, oh, we don't like being followed by these type of people, or we don't like that these type of people don't get what we're saying. And that's why they've gone in that direction. And I think it has not so much harmed the show, but it has lessened it in a way.
Yeah, it's still really, really good and really, really entertaining. I just think that, if some people just tune in and go, I'm just going to tune in, chill out, and enjoy 50 minutes of the Boys doing really cool things and graphic violence to, you know, whales and dolphins and octopuses, then, you know, that's okay. And if other people take a message, that's okay as well. Other than Season 12, that's what I've been watching. Rob, what about you?
Dave, I've been all over the place. I've caught up with some movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where I'd never actually seen the director's cut, which is basically the special edition they made a long time ago, minus the more controversial bits, like they showed inside the spaceship at the end of the film in the special edition. They actually cut that out of the director's cut, so the director's cut is actually shorter than the special edition. Axel F, which is basically Beverly Hills Cop 4, they've just nailed it with that. Such a fun thing to watch. Godzilla Minus One, which is a Japanese film, which was made for about $27.58, but looks as good as like $150 million Hollywood film.
And won an Oscar.
Did it really?
I think it did, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't surprise me. Probably for effects or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Brats, which is a documentary about the Brat Pack back in the 80s, which is made by Andrew McCarthy, who was, of course, part of the Brat Pack. Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, the Tina Fey war correspondent comedy, which wasn't really a comedy at all, but it was very watchable. Hitler and the Nazis on Netflix, which is a series recounting how the Nazis came to power through to their downfall, and which keeps intercutting to the Nuremberg trials as a sort of a framing device and to sort of explain what they were doing or why they were doing these things through the court evidence, basically. I thought that was very well done. Cobra Kai, it's into its last 15 episodes, and they've just dropped the first batch of 5 of those. It's such fun. I love it. And finally, Homicide Los Angeles on Netflix, which isn't so far as good as Homicide New York, but I'm still watching it. It's still quite interesting stuff.
Nice. Any one of those particularly stand out as a recommendation?
I think Hitler and the Nazis, if a listener, or even yourself, well, I know you're into history, Dave, I was going to say, if a listener was into history, I think that's a very well done documentary because it has like the historical reenactments. It has a lot of audio taken from Nuremberg that's never been really used before, because while they shot, 30, 40 hours worth of film footage, they recorded all of the audio. So they take a lot of the audio and they'll sort of be playing the audio and there'll be subtitles if they're speaking German or whatever. And they'll just be having like a modern recreation of the court scene and cutting from the audience to the guards or whatever, just as you're listening to the audio. And it's a very effective way to sort of listen to just what would otherwise be quite dry audio. I really liked that. And it also takes a lot out of the diaries of this American journalist. I can't think of his name offhand. And because there are so many radio reports using his voice, they've done an AI version of his voice to do the narration from his diaries, which I thought was interesting too.
No, that sounds very cool, and a chance to practice my German. A couple of months ago, I did actually read Arian Eve's diaries from the Nuremberg trial, right from the point where he's the one who delivers the indictments to the Nazis right at the start before the trial, and it goes through from there. So that was a really fascinating read.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. And a Nuremberg movie is coming up with Russell Crowe playing Goering.
I wonder how it'll compare to the Alec Baldwin one.
Don't know.
Fair enough. Well, that's enough non-Doctor Who content.
Yes.
We have enjoyed, I think, talking about season 12 of Doctor Who. Hopefully, you've enjoyed listening. As always, send us some feedback. Let us know what you thought. We have plenty coming up in the month of August. We have got the next list makers coming up, which is top 5 historical locations we would like to see in Doctor Who. We have got a Genitardis coming up in the next couple of weeks on the Carnival of Monsters, as voted by you. But the next month, Rob, we're doing one of our little slightly more niche, slightly more off the beaten path topics, a little piece of niche Doctor Who. What are we going to talk about, Rob?
Dave, we're going to be dipping into an audio, which is based on a play that came out many decades ago now, Curse of the Daleks.
Yes, a Doctor Who play from the 1960s. We'll have a little chat about that, but we're going to be listening to the Big Finish drama that was made from the script, more or less unadapted, apart from a couple of little things, to make sure the audience knew what was going on. So, Curse of the Daleks. Feel free to have a listen before next month, but we'll be talking about that. If you're in Australia, don't forget that there are the Sirens of Audio events with Katie Manning and Fraser Hines coming up. They're always good events. If you're in Melbourne, I'll hopefully see you at the Fraser Hines one. I've bought my ticket. But that's all I've got to say, Rob. We've covered a lot, as always.
Oh, Dave, this has been a fun one.
It has. So look, Curse of the Daleks next time. But until then, I've been Dave.
I've been Rob.
And we'll speak then.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to
The Doctor Who Show with Rob and Dave.
Find us online by searching for
The Doctor Who Show.
We also love it when you write in. Drop us a line anytime at hello@thedwshow.net.